Gunfighter life. I guess you know what we're going to talk about today. Guns. Before we get into today's topic, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. It really does help others get to see the podcast. We'll get into today's topic, as always, from a biblical perspective and from firsthand knowledge and experience. And if you want to skip the bio, you can skip ahead to about 3.5 minutes. Who I am. First and foremost, I am a Christian. I make no apologies for that. I grew up in the southeastern United States, what most would consider poor. Grew up hunting and fishing and shooting at a very early age. I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I did combat tours, plural, in Iraq. After that, I was an urban warfare instructor for the United States Marine Corps. After the Marine Corps time, I went to work for LAPD, where I worked regular assignments and more specialized assignments. I've also been a private contractor for the federal government. I've also served the United States Army, both full-time and part-time National Guard. I have been a state rifle and pistol champion in a few different states, a few different times over. I started shooting competitions even before I joined the Marine Corps at 17. I am very blessed to have all those talents, and I am very blessed that God got me through everything that He's gotten me through alive and in one piece and made it back safely when a lot of other good men did not. Not because of anything that I am, but because of who God has made me and because of how much God has protected me and sheltered me. I have served as the commander of a tactical team in a large metropolitan area where our primary job is to stock active shooters. I've hunted and fished all over this beautiful country, everything from whitetail on the East Coast and mule deer on the West Coast, and elk and bear and wolf and exotics, and buffalo. I've been a professional hunter and guide, professional firearms instructor, FBI certified, NRA certified, other 3-letter government agency certified, professional firearms instructor for a lot of years. And as I mentioned first, the most alpha thing about me is I am a follower of Jesus Christ, the ultimate alpha male. With that being said, we'll get into today's topic. All right, guys. On this episode of Gunfighter Life, we're going to be talking about common gunfighter mistakes. So let's get into it. Common gunfighter mistakes. The first are going to be philosophical. Now, as mentioned in the bio, first and foremost, I am a Christian. So let me say that salvation does not come in a piece of cold steel, or a blued rifle barrel, or any particular caliber. Salvation, being saved, comes only from one, Jesus Christ. Doesn't matter how many gunfights you win or lose. One day, as it is written, every knee shall bow and every tongue shall confess that Jesus Christ is Lord. Salvation is not in a gun. It's not in a caliber. It's not in a weapons platform. Salvation is in Christ and Christ alone. My God supplies all my needs. So let's not make the gun more than it is. The gun is a tool. And Jesus, in fact, told his disciples in the Gospel of Luke, if you don't have a sword, sell your garment and buy one. That's how important it is. Yes, Jesus told his disciples to be armed. And you are to be armed. But don't ever make that your salvation. My God supplies all my needs. And it is written, do not be afraid or be discouraged because of this vast army, for the battle is not yours, but God's. 2 Chronicles. So let's get into hardware versus software. And I don't know if anybody here also listens to Bear Independent, but a great channel. And I had this theme before hearing this recently, but this really put it very succinctly. Don't mistake, and I don't remember his exact quote, but I'm going to paraphrase Bear Independent. Don't confuse possession with proficiency. And I think there's a lot of that in today's American gun culture. And there's nothing wrong with collecting guns and having guns and enjoying the beauty of a gun or buying top quality guns. Those are all good things. There's nothing bad in that. But don't ever make the mistake of thinking that because you have a Daniel Defense M4, with a light and a laser and a suppressor, that in any way makes you a gunfighter. Just as in the way that, and forgive the analogy because I'm not a guitar guy, but me buying like the nicest Fender Stratocaster tuned by a master musician does not mean that I can play Jimi Hendrix. Even if you took the guitar out of, a great guitar player's hands, if you took Santana's guitar and gave it to me, it doesn't, and put me on stage, that doesn't mean that I'm gonna come out with anything resembling what he can do with that same tool. So don't look for a hardware solution to a software problem. You are better off with a DPMS Oracle, like the bottom of the basement AR-15 with iron sights and 2 magazines that you train with all the time, and a piece of paracord used as a sling that you run with and gun with and roll around on the ground with, and it's zeroed, and you know where the holdover is at 300 yards, and you know how to get a good prone position, and you know how to do a reload on the move, than you are with that Daniel Defense M4 that sits on the wall, and you're afraid to drop it on the ground and drag it through gravel. Now, nothing wrong with the Daniel Defense M4. If you want one and you're going to train with it, that's great. But don't think that just the mere possession of it makes you proficient with it. And handguns even more than rifles, guys. Handgun is perishable skill. I tell my guys to dry fire every day. I know ammo's a thing right now, but do you dry fire every day except for Sabbath, except for your day of rest? Do you dry fire every day? You can find some time to dry fire. It's just like going to the gym. It's a perishable skill. If I only, go to the range once every 2 months, how proficient am I going to be? If I only go to the gym and bench press every couple of months, even if I work out for 4 hours and I don't work out again for a month or 2 months, how good am I going to be at bench pressing? Likewise with your shooting. It's a perishable skill. It doesn't matter how good you were the day you got out of a training course, unless you get in a gunfight that day. It matters how good you are that day. You better bring it that day, and you don't know when that day is going to come, so you keep your proficiency up. If you stop by, and I live and am a tactical team leader in a fairly large metropolitan area, but I can drive in the desert. Apologize for the phones going off, fellas. In fact, that's a group that I have of close friends of mine where we talk about guns, so pretty fitting. We're talking about, apocalypse rifles. Little discussion group there. So a little good chance for a short break here. So if you want to support this podcast or you want to ask me a question, you can go to Patreon, Good Shepherd Training at Patreon. It's the umbrella that covers this podcast and a couple others that we do. GoodShepherdTraining.com. Good Shepherd Training on Patreon if you want to become part. And if you want to ask questions, if you want to ask me a question, you can do it on there. $1 a month to support this podcast and to ask me a question, or more if you feel like it. But anyway, let's continue on. Here's another common mistake for a shooter is not being proficient enough and trying to compensate for it by moving your sights. A classic example of this is moving your sights like almost every time you go to the range with a handgun. If you're shooting low left, 99% of the time it's not the gun, it's you. You're shooting low left. You're flinching, pre-ignition, flinch, pre-ignition movement of the gun, whatever you want to call it. And that's probably you, not the gun. So don't have your sights always chasing because of your poor marksmanship ability. Hone those skills. That quote is attributed to Einstein. I don't know if Einstein actually said it, but it's often attributed to him, and it said, the definition of insanity is doing the same thing over and over and expecting a different result. Well, I'd like to kind of spin that, and the definition of getting good accuracy is doing the same thing over and over again and expecting the same result. Because if you do something different every time, I don't know how you expect those rounds to go in the same place. So especially on a handgun, unless you look down and the sights have visibly been knocked off or something like that, learn your good marksmanship or have a really good handgun shooter shoot it and in fact confirm that the sights are on or off, and then hone your skills until you can shoot to point of aim, point of impact. And then later when your skills are good, you might want to tweak those sights depending on a certain load or a certain distance or something like that. Here's another common mistake. And that mistake is that of practice and defensive ammo. If you've got, let's say, your M4, and you go out to the range and you practice with cheap, the cheapest ammo you can find, 55 grain, 5.56, 2.23, and you train with it and you got your gun zeroed for it, and then you go and you have your magazines loaded with your, green tip or your 77 grain awesome, special forces rounds. Those rounds might be awesome rounds, but they're not going to hit in the same place as the rounds you're training and have your gun sighted with. Your gun needs to be sighted in with the rounds that you expect to have. This is not show off the cool gear podcast or the LARPer, podcast. Nothing against that stuff. If you want to do that, that's great. But this is gunfighter life. If you're going to be a gunfighter, your gun needs to be zeroed with the ammo that's in it. So my advice is to don't go out and train with a bunch of cheap ammo and then go load up your 77 grain ammo for whatever and put that gun in your truck. My advice would be you have one of two options. You can re-zero your gun every time you take it out and shoot it, or you can find a defensive ammo and a practice ammo that shoots to the same point of aim, point of impact, and you have to test that. Don't just assume that because they're both 55 grain or both 62 grain that they're going to shoot the same point of aim, point of impact. Unless they're advertised that way, then it's very unlikely that they're going to shoot the same point of aim, point of impact. So my advice would be, and this is obviously in the ammo apocalypse that we're going through right now, but find a round that you can shoot and train with and have your gun zeroed for that round. The same with the handgun. Now, you can go out and practice your draw. If your goal that day is to get fast on the draw at 5 yards, the difference between 115 grain and your 147 grain plus P defensive rounds might be minimal. But don't trust your life to anything unproven. You need to run those defensive rounds in that gun. You need to know that those rounds are going to work in the gun that you have. Don't just assume that because it's a Glock, it'll work with that ammo because it's good ammo. That's not a safe assumption. You're trusting your life to something unproven. And you should do the same thing with your handgun. Get rounds that shoot to the same point of impact, point of aim, and make sure they function in your gun. Hornady makes a very good, their 9mm critical duty load, I believe, is 135 grain. And I'm sure it's a great terminal performance load out of a duty-size handgun. But it's kind of hard to find 135 grain, even in good times when ammo is plentiful, 135 grain with the same bullet profile practice ammo. So I don't personally use that load, even though it might be a very great load. I like the Speer Gold Dot 147s or the Winchester Ranger T 147s. And I'll practice with, the Speer Lawman, which is designed to have the same as the Speer Gold Dot point of aim, point of impact, bullet profile to make sure it feeds. So again, that common mistake, don't go run the cheapest ammo and then load your gun up with something different and expect that it's going to hit in the same place. When you pull that trigger, you ought to know where that round's going to go. And you can't do that if you've never zeroed that gun with that ammo. The next big thing I think is a common mistake for a lot of shooters is expensive versus cheap. And there's times to go expensive and buy quality stuff, and there's times that it's kind of a waste of money. Or not a waste of money, but there's times that money could be spent better somewhere else. A good example of this is somebody goes out and buys a super high-end rifle and a good scope, and they buy crappy mounts. Well, that scope and that rifle is only as accurate as those mounts are good at holding a zero. So don't skimp out on the mounts. Or spending all that and getting quality mounts and not spending $6 on Loctite. That would be an example. Another big one is magazines. You get a super high-end, M4, and you're going to run it, and your defensive mags are going to be the cheap Milsurp magazines, the old metal ones. If you want to train with those, that's fine. You're great for training classes. There's so much better, more reliable options. The P-mags, Lancer mags, the Amend 2 mags. Don't cheap out on those. Don't go buy a $2,000 AR and then run it with the cheap metal mags. Unless it's, like I said, for training or to beat up. The next one I'll go might be controversial, but I'm telling you my preference. You don't have to listen to this, but getting a really nice, good quality handgun or rifle and running that cheap steel case, steel jacketed ammo through it. You're going to spend all that money on a good rifle or a good handgun, and you're going to try and save a few cents per round on that cheap ammo. Well, a couple of things with that is if you take a magnet, it doesn't just stick on most of that ammo to the casing. It sticks to the actual bullet because it's a steel jacket. So you have a steel jacket under all that pressure on a bullet ripping through your very nice high-end barrel. I don't know why you would do that. If you want to have some of that ammo, for the, zombie apocalypse, and like when that ammo runs out, you're done with the gun anyway because you can't shoot it anymore or something like that, maybe I could see that. But as a general rule, having a really nice gun and running that cheap ammo through it, it doesn't make sense to me. If you want to buy a bunch of that and then have like a backup AR that you just beat the crap out of and it's just for training, and you don't care when the extractor snaps, you don't care when the barrel wears out, then that's fine. But if we're talking about your go-to gunfighting rifle, I would not run that stuff through it. Like I said, you don't know when the day is going to be when you're called upon to use that weapon. And you don't know in shooting that stuff when you're done, when the next round is going to snap that extractor because it got extra work, on that steel case ammo. Might be the day you really need it. Another big one, and I fell victim to this when I was younger. What looks good on paper? What looks good on paper versus real life? And I'll tell you a story about me. When I was a lifeguard, when it was slow, I had this big shooting book with a bunch of ballistics tables. And I lived, at the time I was working in Maryland. And I was a hunter and stuff, but I was looking for a good deer rifle. And I was looking at these ballistics tables. And I had it in my mind that the 7mm Remington mag was, what I needed. Because it looks great on paper. It shoots flat. It's got all this energy. Now keep in mind, I live east of the Mississippi River. I was going to hunt white-tailed deer. You quickly find out when you have a super lightweight hunting 7mm Remington mag that it's not much fun to train with and shoot. And there's a time and a place for a 7mm Remington Magnum. But, east of the Mississippi, unless you're talking about going moose hunting or something like that, and even then there's probably better options. It was not what I needed. I bought it based on what was on paper and not on reality. A lot of people buy Glocks, and that's fine. They look good on paper. They're super reliable. They have good capacity. But then, can you reach the controls on that gun? Can you manipulate that weapon? Does it fit your hand? Every time you shoot it, you have to fight with it. Fight with it as in I got to turn it in my hand to reach the controls. I have to constantly torque my wrist because it's at a weird grip angle. It's so fat that I can't reach the trigger. I'm speaking from experience. When I was a police officer, I did that with the Glock 21. On paper, it looked great. Double stack 45. All that firepower in my handgun. But the more proficient I got, the more competitions I shot, I realized that gun was too big for my hands. No matter how good it looked on paper, it was not the best choice for me. On paper, it looks like, why would you ever get a 1911 instead of a Glock 21 that holds twice as many rounds? Or almost twice as many rounds, depending on the magazines. Well, maybe because I can draw out faster and get first, second, third, fourth round hits reliably, because it fits my hands better, because it shoots point of aim, point of impact. And getting your first, second, third, fourth round hit quickly on target is way more important than having, 13, 14, 15 rounds in a magazine. And I'm not against high-capacity magazines. You should be able to have whatever magazine you want. But that's not what's usually important in a gunfight. Far more important that you can get that good first-round hit off quickly and hit your target. And on paper, that might not show up between those two guns. But when you feel the trigger on a Glock and it's like dragging a piano down a dirt road, and you feel the trigger on a 1911, and it's like a finely tuned machine race car. When I grab that gun on my hand, naturally the center of the pad at the center of my trigger finger lands naturally on the center of the trigger, and it doesn't force that shot left or right, then you're like, oh, I get it. So, again, that common mistake of buying something based on what's on paper. You might learn a lot of this the hard way. You might go out and spend your money on that gun. But buying a gun is not like marrying a woman. Like, you're not bound to it. You can decide that it doesn't fit you or it's not what's best for you, and you can sell it and get another one. That's a great thing about guns. You might lose a little bit of money, but guns are a pretty safe investment. So don't hang on to it based on what looks good on paper or what people think is cool. Choose your weapons based on what works for you. Because you know what's not cool? Losing a gunfight. That's not cool. I'll close out with one final one, and that is zero. Your gun has to be zeroed. Unless the situation you're in, you put the muzzle right up against what you're going to shoot. You should never pull the trigger unless you're trying to get your gun zeroed, unless you know you're going to hit that target. And you don't know that unless your gun is zeroed. Zeroed with the ammo that's in it, zeroed for you, the shooter, So zero that weapon. If you bought a gun, if you're listening to this and you're new to gunfighting, you're new to defensive firearms use, you bought that M4, that AR-15, and you haven't zeroed it, if you haven't confirmed that it shoots where the sights are, get out there and do that. With that, guys, we'll wrap up this episode. Get out there and be that strong, dominant warfighter, gunfighter that you're called to be. Protector of you, of your family, whatever situation it is. Even if it's you as a man protecting your family from invaders, from rioters, from any potential danger, to putting food on the table, whatever it is. Psalms 144, blessed be the Lord my rock, who trains my hands for war and my fingers for battle. All right, guys, don't forget to like, subscribe, and comment. Don't forget, if you like this podcast, you may also like Simple Man Sermons, where we talk about the important stuff, God and your relationship with Him. Also, the Alpha Male Podcast, where we can get together, kind of a virtual fireside chat, and talk about the strong, dominant alpha male men we're created to be and not apologize for it. You can find all those things under the umbrella of GoodShepherdTraining.com, GoodShepherdTraining.com, and again, Good Shepherd Training on Patreon if you want to contribute to this message. Thanks, guys. Have a blessed day.